She walked in on her boyfriend kissing someone else, so she kissed a mobster. Before we dive into the story, tell me where in the world you're watching from, and if this story steals your heart, please hit subscribe. The bile rose in Holly's throat, hot and acidic, choking off the ambient sound of clinking glasses and muted laughter. It was as if the entire glittering upscale bar had suddenly been submerged underwater, the sounds distorted and distant, leaving only the horrifying clarity of the vision before her. Mark, her boyfriend, the man she had meticulously dressed for tonight in her best black silk, the man she had loved for 2 years, had his back to her, but his hands were not his own. They were buried in the blonde hair of a woman she had never seen, and his mouth was fused to hers in a way that left no room for interpretation. It was not a friendly mistake, not a misunderstanding. It was a betrayal, stark and brutal, happening just 20 feet from where she stood, her heart turning to a shard of ice in her chest. For a moment, she was frozen, the silk dress that had made her feel so confident now feeling like a second skin she wanted to rip off. Then the ice turned to fire, a rage so potent it vibrated through her, shaking her hands and blurring her vision with a different kind of moisture. Not tears. Not yet. She would not give him the satisfaction. She moved. Her heels clicked on the polished wood floor, a sharp, angry rhythm cutting through the bar's sophisticated jazz. Mark finally pulled away from the woman, his eyes wide and panicked as he saw her approaching. The woman, a vapid-looking creature with too much lipstick, just looked annoyed. "Holly," Mark started, wiping his mouth, a gesture of guilt so blatant it was insulting. "Holly, it's not what you... We were just talking." The lie was so lazy, so disrespectful that it snapped the last thread of her composure. She did not yell, she did not cry. Her voice came out low and trembling, a predator's growl she did not recognize as her own. "How stupid do you think I am, Mark?" His face, usually so boyishly charming, turned petulant. "Look, can we just not do this here? You're making a scene." That was it. The humiliation was a physical blow. She had given him 2 years, and he was worried about a scene. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw nothing but a shallow, weak man. She backed away, the single word no escaping her lips, and then she turned and fled. She did not know where she was going, only that she had to get out, away from his lying eyes and the scent of the other woman's perfume. She pushed through the crowd, her storm-gray eyes flashing, her long auburn hair clinging to the damp skin of her neck. She was almost at the heavy oak doors when she collided with a wall. Except the wall was warm, and it was wearing an immaculate charcoal suit. She stumbled back, and a large, strong hand shot out not to steady her, but to capture her wrist. The grip was not painful, but it was absolute. She looked up, ready to spit fire at whoever had stopped her, and her breath caught. The man was tall, impossibly broad, and seemed to absorb the light around him. His jawline was sharp enough to cut glass, his hair was raven black, and a faint, pale scar near his lip only made his faint half-smirk more dangerous. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were the most piercing, icy blue she had ever seen, and they were looking at her with an intensity that was both unsettling and magnetic. He had been watching her. He had seen everything. He did not let go of her wrist. His gaze flickered over her shoulder, to where Mark was now standing, watching them with a mixture of confusion and masculine pride, as if her finding a replacement so quickly somehow validated him. The man's blue eyes narrowed, returning to Holly's face. His voice was a low murmur, a gravelly sound that vibrated straight through her skin. "If you are going to make him jealous," he said, his thumb brushing the pulse point on her wrist, "do it right." Holly was trembling, caught between heartbreak and rage, running on pure self-destructive impulse. She did not know this man. She could feel the danger rolling off him in waves, a cold, controlled power that the entire bar seemed to bend around. He was right. Mark was watching. Let him watch this. In a fit of defiance so unlike her, she rose on her toes, fisted her hand in the lapel of his expensive suit, and pulled him down to her. She kissed him. It was not a gentle press of lips. It was a desperate, angry, territorial act. It was all the humiliation, all the pain, all the fury of the last 10 minutes poured into one reckless gesture. For a split second, the man, the stranger, was still, a predator assessing an unexpected move. Then his other hand came up, splaying across the small of her back, and he took control. The kiss changed instantly. It was no longer her act of defiance, it was his act of possession. His mouth was firm, skilled, and utterly devastating. He deepened the kiss, one hand moving from her back to cradle her jaw, holding her steady as he plundered her senses. The world dissolved. There was no bar, no Mark, no blonde. There was only the scent of expensive cologne and clean soap, the solid wall of his chest, the faint, dangerous scar under her fingertips, and the undeniable, terrifying heat he was pouring into her. It was the most profound kiss of her life, and it was with a total stranger. When he finally, slowly pulled back, her lips were tingling and her lungs were burning. She was dizzy, her hands still clinging to his suit. His blue eyes were dark, pupils blown, fixed on her mouth before traveling back to her eyes. He had not broken a sweat, he was in perfect control. Across the room, she heard a glass shatter. Mark. The stranger's, the man's lip quirked, the scar moving. "That," he murmured, his voice a possessive rumble, "is how you do it." He did not release her immediately. He looked at her, truly looked at her, as if committing every detail of her face to memory. "Adrian Morty," he said, not as an introduction, but as a statement. He did not ask for her name. He slowly released her wrist, his hand trailing fire down her arm before he let it drop. He gave her a slight nod, a dismissal that was also somehow a promise, and stepped back. Holly stood there for a second, her body thrumming with an energy she could not name. Then, her courage failing, she turned and fled the bar for the second time, her heart pounding for an entirely new, and infinitely more dangerous, reason. She did not look back, but she could feel Adrian Morty's icy blue eyes on her until the moment the heavy doors swung shut, sealing her fate. The next morning, Holly woke with a different kind of hangover. It was not the dull throb of alcohol, but the sharp, electric hum of regret and adrenaline. Her mouth still felt bruised, her skin still prickled where his hands had been. Adrian Morty. The name echoed in her small, pre-war apartment, feeling too large and too dangerous for the space. She had spent the night alternating between fits of weeping over Mark's betrayal and packing her floor, terrified by the reckless impulse of kissing that stranger. He was not just a man. He was a presence, a force of nature dressed in a bespoke suit. She knew instinctively that men like him did not exist in her world, the world of art galleries where she worked as an underpaid assistant, of student loan debt, and of dating men like Mark who were ultimately, disappointingly, just boys. She tried to push the entire night from her mind, focusing on the mundane tasks of getting ready for work, forcing herself to eat toast she could not taste. The black silk dress was heaped on her floor, a physical reminder of her humiliation and her recklessness, and she kicked it under the bed, unable to look at it. Her job at the gallery was usually a refuge, a place of quiet beauty, but today the sterile white walls felt like a prison. She was cataloging a new shipment of uninspired landscapes, her boss droning on about an upcoming exhibit when the delivery arrived. It was not a small bouquet. A delivery man, looking overwhelmed, wheeled in a cart bearing an orchid. It was the most magnificent and terrifying plant Holly had ever seen. It was a black pearl orchid, a specimen so rare and expensive it was practically mythical, its blossoms a deep, velvety maroon that was almost black, potted in a sleek, minimalist ceramic vase that probably cost more than her month's rent. A card was tucked into the leaves. Her hands, smudged with packing dust, trembled as she opened the small, cream-colored envelope. There was no message, no flowery sentiment, just a single, strong, embossed letter. Her blood ran cold. He knew where she worked. Of course he knew. A man like Adrian Morty did not leave things to chance. Her boss was fawning over the plant. "My goodness, Holly, who do you know?" Holly could only shake her head, the scent of the orchid, faint, exotic, and heavy, making her feel lightheaded. The rest of the day passed in a paranoid blur. She was jumpy, starting at every ring of the gallery's bell, scanning the street for a tall, dark-suited man. The real confrontation, however, came from a ghost of her past. Just as she was locking up, a familiar, unwelcome figure appeared, blocking the doorway. It was Mark. He did not look apologetic, he looked furious. "Holly," he snapped, "we need to talk." Holly clutched her keys, her knuckles white. "No, Mark, we don't. Get out of my way." She tried to push past him, but he grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her skin. "I'm not done. Who was that guy you left with? You embarrassed me. You kissed him right in front of me." The hypocrisy was so staggering it left her speechless. "I embarrassed you," she hissed, trying to pull her arm free. "You were cheating on me." Mark's face darkened. "That's different. You're mine, Holly. You don't just get to walk off and..." His grip tightened, and a flash of real fear went through Holly. Mark had a temper, but he had never been physical. I believe the lady asked you to let her go. The voice was not Adrian's. It was deep, calm, and utterly devoid of emotion. A black, obscenely expensive sedan had pulled up to the curb, so silently Holly hadn't even noticed it. Two men, both built like mountains and dressed in suits that were just as sharp as Adrian's, stood on the sidewalk. They were not looking at Holly. They were looking at Mark's hand on her arm. They did not move, they did not threaten. They just stood there. Their presence was a physical weight, a promise of violence held in perfect professional reserve. Mark, who always fancied himself a tough guy, froze. He looked at the two men, then at the blacked-out windows of the car, and the color drained from his face. He released Holly's arm so fast it was as if she had burned him. He took a step back, holding his hands up. "Hey, man, no problem. We were just talking." The men did not respond. Mark gave Holly one last look, a look of pure fear and resentment, and then he practically ran down the street. Holly was breathing heavily, rubbing the red marks on her arm. The passenger door of the sedan opened. One of the men simply gestured for her to get in. It was not a request. She was trapped, but she also knew, bizarrely, that she was safe. She got into the car. The leather was so soft it felt like sinking into butter. The windows were so dark the world outside was muted. The car pulled into traffic, moving with a silent, powerful grace. A moment later, a partition she had not even seen slid down, and there was a phone, a sleek burner-style model, sitting on the console. It rang. She stared at it, her heart hammering. It rang again. Knowing she had no other choice, she picked it up. "Hello," she whispered. His voice filled the small, enclosed space as clear as if he were sitting next to her, and it sent a shiver down her spine. "Dinner, 7 o'clock, a car will be waiting." It was not a question. It was a summons. "What if I say no?" She asked, though she already knew the answer. There was a pause, a dark, weighted silence. "He will not bother you again, Holly, but a world where men like him exist is not safe for a woman like you. Not alone." The line clicked. He had not answered her question. He had simply stated a fact. The car pulled up to her apartment building. The man who had opened her door was there, waiting to close it. She got out, and the car pulled away, disappearing into the New York traffic as if it had never been. She was being protected, but it felt terrifyingly like she was being caged. Dinner was not at a public restaurant. The car, a different one this time, took her to a private high-rise, a sleek monolith of glass and steel that pierced the New York skyline. An elevator, opened with a private key by another silent driver, took her straight to the penthouse. The doors opened not into a lobby, but directly into Adrian Morty's home. It was vast, minimalist, and cold. All marble floors, chrome accents, and floor-to-ceiling windows that displayed the glittering city like a conquered kingdom. Adrian was standing by the window, a glass of dark liquor in his hand, silhouetted against the lights. He turned, and her breath hitched. He was not in a suit, but in dark trousers and a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms and an expensive-looking watch. The scar near his lip was more pronounced in the soft light. "Holly," he said, his voice a low rumble that filled the cavernous room. "I'm glad you came." A table was set for two near the window, overlooking the city. A private chef who appeared and disappeared with ghostly efficiency served a meal that Holly was too nervous to eat. The food was exquisite, but the tension was the main course. Adrian was a study in controlled power. He did not talk about himself, about the bar, or about the men in the car. Instead, he asked questions. He asked about her work at the gallery, about her passion for art, about the neighborhood she lived in. It was not a conversation, it was an interrogation, a gentle, probing assessment. He was learning her, cataloging her weaknesses and strengths. "Mark," he finally said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, "is a problem of the past. He had entanglements, debts. He will not be in a position to bother you or anyone else for a very long time." The finality in his voice was absolute. It was not a threat, it was a weather report. It was a fact. Holly put her fork down. "What do you want, Adrian?" He looked at her, his blue eyes intense and unblinking. "What I want, Holly, I take." He stood up and walked to the window, motioning for her to join him. She did, her legs feeling unsteady. They stood side by side, the city sprawling beneath them. "I saw you in that bar," he said, his voice dropping. "You were incandescent. You were drowning, and you decided to start a fire instead. I find that compelling." He turned to face her, his proximity overwhelming. "You are in my world now, whether you intended to be or not. That kiss." He reached out, his finger tracing the line of her jaw, his touch shockingly gentle. "That was a claim. In my world, we protect what we claim." Holly's heart was pounding. This was not romance, this was ownership. I'm not a thing to be claimed, she whispered, her voice betraying her. His lip quirked, the scar deepening. Aren't you? He murmured. You ran from one man and straight to another. You chose the bigger predator. The question is, what are you going to do now? He was not giving her a choice. He was simply waiting for her to accept the one that had already been made. Life with Adrian Morty was not a whirlwind romance. It was a velvet-gloved abduction. Holly's world was subtly and irrevocably altered, the strings of her life pulled by an invisible, powerful hand. 2 days after the dinner at his penthouse, she received a call from the Morty Arts Foundation, a prestigious organization she had only read about in art journals. They had an opening for a junior curator, a position that was not advertised, a position that paid 3 times her gallery salary, and a position that was, they assured her, hers if she wanted it. She knew it was Adrian. She knew it was a test. Taking the job meant accepting the gilded cage. But she also remembered Mark's hands on her, the fear, and the quiet, efficient protection of Adrian's men. With a sense of fatalistic surrender, she accepted. The foundation was located in a secure, modern building that felt more like a fortress than a nonprofit. Her new colleagues were professional, polite, and kept their distance. She suspected they all knew exactly who she was to Adrian Morty. At the same time, her apartment, which she had suddenly been able to afford with her new salary, underwent an upgrade. A security team, dispatched by Morty Enterprises, arrived to install a system so advanced it probably monitored her breathing. There were new locks, reinforced windows, and a panic button that she was assured went directly to a private security detail. She was safer than she had ever been in her life, and she had never felt more like a prisoner. Adrian himself was a contradictory presence. He was busy, often disappearing for days at a time for business she knew better than to ask about. But when he was with her, he was utterly present. He took her to dinners at restaurants so exclusive they had no signs, to operas she pretended to understand, and to his penthouse, which was slowly starting to feel less like a cold museum and more like a fortress they shared. He was protective, possessive, and surprisingly considerate. He listened when she spoke about art. He remembered she preferred tea to coffee, and his touch, when it was not possessive, was almost tender. The true test came a few weeks later. My father is expecting us for dinner on Sunday, he announced one evening, his back to her as he loosened his tie. It was not a question. Holly's blood chilled. She had been living in a curated bubble, a world where Adrian was the only Morty. Now she was being brought to the source. The Morty family dinner was not a cozy, pasta-filled affair. It was held at a sprawling, high-security compound in the countryside, a place of stone walls and iron gates. The dining room was baronial, with a table long enough to seat 30. At its head sat Giovanni Morty, the patriarch. He was an older, leaner version of Adrian with the same sharp jawline but with eyes that were a flat, cold gray. He was polite, appraising her as he would a new piece of art or a racehorse. Then there was Leo, Adrian's younger brother. Leo was all charm, all smiles, all teeth. He kissed Holly's hand, his eyes lingering on her a moment too long. So you are the one who has finally tamed my brother, he said, his voice slick. It's a pleasure, Tesoro. Adrian's hand on the small of Holly's back was a vice. Leo! Adrian's voice was a quiet warning, and the charm evaporated from Leo's face, replaced by a flash of resentment. The dinner was a tense, coded affair. They spoke of business, of shipping, of construction, all sanitized terms for a sprawling empire built on shadows. Holly felt like a fraud, a commoner at a royal court, and she could feel Giovanni's eyes on her, weighing her, judging her. When they finally left, Holly was trembling. The silence in the car was thick. When they got back to the penthouse, she finally broke. She whirled on him, her anger, her fear, her frustration all boiling over. What was that? You didn't take me to meet your family. You took me to an audition. I am not a painting you acquired, Adrian. I am not a piece of property to be shown off to your father. She was breathing hard, her hands fisted at her sides, expecting him to be angry, to shut her down with that cold authority. Instead, Adrian just looked at her, his expression unreadable. He walked to the bar, poured 2 glasses of whiskey, and handed one to her. Drink, he commanded. She took it, the glass heavy in her hand. He undid his cufflinks, his movements precise, and sat on the edge of his massive desk, facing her. You are right, he said quietly, stunning her into silence. It was an audition, and you passed. He took a sip of his drink. In my world, Holly, we do not date. We do not have casual flings. It is inefficient. It is dangerous. My father, my brother, they are my business, my life. They needed to see who I was investing in. He gestured to the city. This empire, it is not built on trust or love. It is built on power and loyalty, and it is surrounded by enemies. My father needed to see that you were not a weakness. He looked at her, his blue eyes raw. And I needed to see if you were strong enough to stand next to me. He stood and walked toward her, stopping just inches away. He reached out and touched the faint scar near his lip. Do you know how I got this? He asked, his voice rough. She shook her head. A meeting with a rival. I was younger, too confident. I thought it was a negotiation. It was an assassination attempt. This, he touched the scar, was from a broken bottle. It reminds me every day that weakness or loving something weakly is a death sentence. He cupped her face, his hands hard and calloused. I do not know how to love weakly, Holly. I saw you and I wanted you. And what I want, I protect, I claim, I consume. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by that dark, possessive fire. You are not my property, you are my necessity. And then he kissed her. The fight, the fear, the raw, brutal honesty of his world. It all culminated in that moment. It was not a sweet kiss. It was a desperate, hungry, claiming act. It was the kiss of a man who had never been allowed to be gentle, and the kiss of a woman who was terrified to realize she did not want him to be. She was trapped, but as her hands moved from his chest to his hair, pulling him closer, she knew, with terrifying certainty, that she was no longer even trying to find the key. A new, strange normalcy settled in. Holly excelled at the Morty Arts Foundation, her genuine passion for art and her keen eye impressing her superiors, who were all too happy to report her successes back to Adrian. She was no longer just his mistress. She was an asset. She saw Adrian most nights, their lives intertwining in the sterile luxury of his penthouse. The danger that hummed beneath the surface of his life was a constant companion, a third person in their relationship. She saw it in the way he always sat facing the door in restaurants, in the tense, coded phone calls he took at all hours, and in the ever-present shadows of his men who were a constant, reassuring, and terrifying perimeter. She was safe, she was provided for, she was kept. And though she fought against the passivity of it, a part of her, the part that had been so broken and lost, found a dark comfort in his absolute control. The comfort was shattered on a Tuesday. She had been feeling it for days, a subtle shift in the air, the feeling of being watched. Not by Adrian's men, their presence was a known quantity, a heavy blanket. This was different. This was a prickle on the back of her neck, the sense of a car staying behind her for too many blocks, a flicker of movement in the alley across from her apartment. She told herself she was being paranoid, that Adrian's world was making her see shadows everywhere. But when she came home from the foundation, she knew. The advanced security system was still active, the green light blinking its silent all clear. But the air in her apartment was wrong. It was still cold. And on her pristine white duvet, standing out like a drop of blood, was a single, dead black rose. The petals were dry and brittle, a grotesque mockery of the magnificent orchid he had sent her. She did not scream. She did not cry. She backed out of the apartment, her movements steady, and hit the panic button on the keypad by the door. Within 90 seconds, 2 of Adrian's men were at her side, guns drawn, sweeping the apartment. It was clear. Nothing was taken, nothing else was out of place. It was not a robbery. It was a message. When Adrian arrived, he was not the calm, controlled CEO. This was a different man. His face was a mask of cold fury, his blue eyes chips of ice. He saw the rose, and a low, animalistic sound rumbled in his chest. He dismissed his men with a sharp nod and turned to Holly. He did not ask if she was all right. He grabbed her, his hands hard on her shoulders, and pulled her against his chest, his face buried in her hair. He held her so tightly she could barely breathe. "You are not safe," he said, his voice a strained rasp. "He failed. I failed." Pulled back, his hands framing her face. "I need to tell you the truth, all of it." He led her to the sofa but did not sit. He paced, a caged panther, the contained violence rolling off him. "Mark, your ex, he was not just a cheating idiot. He was a degenerate gambler. He owed money, a lot of money, to the Volkovs, the Russian Bratva." Holly felt the blood drain from her face. "They have been trying to get a foothold in this city, trying to move in on my family's territory. They owned Mark. They were using him." He stopped packing and looked at her. "That bar, Siren's Call, it is one of ours. Mark was likely there on their orders to be seen to gather information. I do not know, he was a low-level pawn." He ran a hand through his hair. "And then you kissed me. in the middle of my bar in front of his handler, who I now know was watching. He clenched his fists. You did not just make him jealous, Holly. You painted a target on yourself. You took a pawn from one side of the board and declared him a queen on the other. You made yourself valuable. He sat down, the anger draining away, replaced by a weary resignation. The Volkovs see you as a weakness, my weakness. They think they can use you to get to me, to force a negotiation. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw not a mob boss, but a man trapped by his own life. I can make this stop, he said, his voice flat. I can give you a new life, a new name, a new identity. Anywhere in the world, you will be safe, you will be free. I will fund it, and you will never have to see me or this life again. He was offering her an escape, the key to the gilded cage. He was offering to let her go. Holly looked at him, this dangerous, powerful, broken man who had claimed her, protected her, and now was offering to release her. The old Holly, the girl in the black silk dress, would have run. She would have taken the out and never looked back. But she was not that girl anymore. She had stood in his family's home. She had slept in his bed. She had seen the weight he carried. And the dead rose on her bed. It did not just scare her. It made her angry. They had violated her home. They had threatened her. No, she said, her voice quiet but firm. Adrian looked up, his eyes narrowing. No, she repeated, standing up. I'm not running. He took my life. You gave me a different one. It's messy and it's dangerous, but it's mine. I am not running. She walked over to him, her defiance a tangible thing. They think I am your weakness. Fine, show them. Show them I'm your secret weapon. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Adrian Morty's face. The predator was back. All right, Holly, he murmured, pulling her onto his lap. Let's show them how we go to war. Dynamic in the penthouse shifted. Holly was no longer a beautiful, protected occupant. She was a participant. She sat with Adrian in his vast, glass-walled office, the city lights spread out below them like a campaign map. He was on the phone, his voice a low, commanding stream of Italian and terse English, moving pieces across the board. He was a wartime boss, and the controlled fury he had shown in her apartment had been channeled into a cold, lethal strategy. Holly, for her part, was not idle. She returned to her job at the foundation, now flanked by a discreet but ever-present shadow, one of Adrian's best men. But she was not just going through the motions. The Volkovs had made this personal. She now had a stake in this, and she was going to protect her new, complicated life with the same defiance that had made her kiss a mobster in the first place. Her contribution came from an unexpected place. The foundation was preparing for a major contemporary art auction, and as a curator, Holly was reviewing the provenance and acquisition histories of potential pieces. She was reviewing the sales logs from a smaller rival auction house that the Volkovs were known to frequent, looking for patterns, when she saw it. It was a series of sales of obscure Eastern European sculptures. They were not particularly valuable or noteworthy, but they were being bought for sums far exceeding their worth, often by shell corporations, and then, months later, resold at a significant loss through a different gallery. To a normal eye, it was just bad business. To Holly, who had spent years studying the intricacies of the art world, it was a glaring red flag. They were not bad at business, they were washing. It was a classic money laundering scheme, using the subjective, high-value art market to turn dirty cash into legitimate assets. She spent the entire night cross-referencing names, tracing the shell corporations, and building a file. The next morning, she bypassed breakfast and went straight to Adrian's office. He was already there, looking exhausted, a map of the city's shipping terminals on his screen. Adrian, she said, her voice firm, I think I found it. I think I found how to hurt them. She spread the files across his pristine desk. He looked at her, skeptical, and then his eyes scanned the pages. His skepticism turned to focus, and then to a slow, appreciative gleam. Holly, he said, his voice rough with admiration, this is brilliant. He saw it immediately. It was not just a side operation. It was their main financial artery, the method they were using to legitimize their drug and weapons money in the city. This, he said, tapping a specific corporate name, is the key. You have just given me the key. Adrian Morty did not fight like a street thug. He fought like a king. He did not send his men in with guns. That was messy, and it would start a war that would bring unwanted attention from the federal government. Instead, he made 2 calls. The first was to his contact at the largest international bank in New York. He cashed in a favor, as he put it, and within an hour, an anonymous, high-priority tip about multi-jurisdictional financial irregularities was flagged at the Internal Revenue Service and the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, pointing them directly at the shell corporations Holly had uncovered. The second call was darker. He spoke in rapid, low Italian to someone he called Zio in Sicily. He was not just a New York boss, he was part of an older, global network. He was leaking the data to the Volkov's superiors back in Russia, detailing exactly how the New York operation was not only clumsy, but how its leader was skimming profits and exposing them all. He was dismantling their organization from the outside and the inside. The fallout was swift and silent. 2 days later, the lead story on the news was not about a mafia war, but about a massive, pre-dawn federal raid on 3 high-end art galleries and the offices of a dozen import-export businesses. The Volkov leader was arrested, not for murder, but for tax evasion and racketeering. His picture was splayed across the screen, looking confused and defeated. And buried in the list of minor arrests was a familiar name, Mark. He had been caught up in the financial sweep, a low-level pawn who was now just another casualty. The Volkov threat was not just neutralized, it was erased. The organization imploded, its leader in federal custody and its reputation ruined with their own people. There would be no retaliation. It was a checkmate. That night, the penthouse was quieter than Holly had ever heard it. The city lights glittered, but for the first time, they did not look like enemy territory. Adrian was standing by the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand, watching the city he owned. Holly came up behind him, her hands settling on his chest, her head resting on his back. He was solid, warm, and he was hers. He covered her hands with his own. "It is done," he said. It was not a boast, just a fact. "Mark." "He was arrested," Holly said quietly. "I know," Adrian replied. "He will serve time for financial crimes. It is a cleaner ending for him." He turned in her arms, his blue eyes soft, the icy edges melted by the night's victory. "You were a problem I did not know I needed, Holly." She smiled, a small, genuine smile. "And you are a monster I find I do not mind, Adrian." He cupped her face, his gaze intense. "You are no one's weakness," he murmured. "You are my queen." He kissed her, and it was not the angry, claiming kiss from the bar, nor the desperate, passionate clash from their first night. It was a promise. It was the kiss of a king and his queen, secure in their fortress, masters of the glittering, dangerous world below. It was conclusive. It was satisfying. It was, in its own dark way, earned.